Hi, Jordan. Thanks for joining me today. I want to kick off with a concept that's been gaining traction across modern data organizations: treating data as a product. From your perspective, especially at a leadership level, what does that mean?
Thanks, Alex. Happy to be here. So, data as a product represents a fundamental shift in how data teams operate. Traditionally, data has been treated as a byproduct, something that's extracted, cleaned, and handed over to stakeholders when requested. But when we treat data as a product, we begin thinking about it in the same way a product team thinks about software. That means it needs to have defined users, clear documentation, discoverability, performance expectations, and dedicated ownership. Just like software products evolve with versions, feature requests, and user feedback, so should data products. This mindset elevates the role of data teams from being service providers to being enablers of strategic decision-making.
That makes sense conceptually, but let's make it more concrete. Can you walk me through an example of a data product you've led or overseen that embodies this approach?
Sure. At one of my previous organizations, we had a major problem with fragmentation in how customer behavior was tracked. Different teams had their own views. Marketing looked at campaign responses, support looked at tickets, and product teams tracked in-app behavior. So we created what we called the Customer 360 table. It was a unified view that combined transactional data, behavioral logs, support history, and customer metadata into one central product. But we didn't just build a table and throw it into a warehouse. We assigned it an owner, documented every field, built data lineage visualizations, set SLAs for data freshness, and published a changelog that captured every schema update. We also set up recurring reviews with stakeholders across departments to gather feedback, understand new use cases, and reprioritize feature development. This table quickly became the foundation for every personalized experience, churn model, and customer segmentation across the company.
That's pretty comprehensive. Who exactly owned that product? Was it someone from your data engineering team?
Ownership was collaborative but clearly defined. The infrastructure and performance aspects, the actual pipeline, were owned by the data engineering team. The logic of customer segmentation and the definitions of key metrics were owned by our analytics leads. We also had a data product manager whose job was to coordinate all this. They worked with stakeholders to gather requirements, maintain the product backlog, and prioritize changes based on business value. Ultimately, there was a DRI, a directly responsible individual, assigned for each data product. That person was accountable for adoption, quality, and delivery timelines. This structure helped us scale our product thinking across more than 20 data products without creating confusion or overlapping responsibilities.
You mentioned adoption. How do you track or measure whether a data product is actually being used effectively?
That's a great question. We generally tracked four main metrics: adoption, stability, trust, and business impact. Adoption was measured through query logs, dashboard embeds, and API calls. We monitored how many teams accessed the product and how frequently. Stability referred to the number of incidents or SLA breaches, how often the pipeline broke or failed to refresh on time. Trust was a bit softer, but we ran quarterly surveys and collected feedback through structured interviews to gauge stakeholder confidence in the product. If people started duplicating data or creating parallel pipelines, that was a red flag. Finally, business impact was evaluated by linking the data product to downstream outcomes. For example, if a marketing team using our segmentation logic saw a lift in campaign conversion, we tracked that. All these signals helped us understand which products were thriving and which needed more support or rework.
One of the big challenges I've seen is that making data products robust and reusable adds time up front. Doesn't that slow down teams who want to move fast?
It's true that adding product rigor introduces some friction at the start, but the cost of skipping that rigor shows up later, and it's always higher. Ad hoc pipelines break easily. One person leaves and suddenly nobody knows what the table does or where the data comes from. Schema changes upstream lead to silent failures downstream. Over time, you spend more time firefighting than delivering value. When we productize our data assets properly, meaning we version them, document them, assign owners, and run validation checks, we might spend 15 to 20% more time during development, but we save exponentially more during maintenance. That said, we don't treat every dataset as a full-fledged product. We use a tiered system. For one-off analysis or exploratory work, we allow flexibility. But for anything that powers a recurring business process, a dashboard used by executives, or a machine learning model, we treat it like a product with all the discipline that comes with that.
That's a good way to balance things. Tell me more about versioning. What does versioning mean in the context of a data product?
Versioning in data is critical, especially when you have downstream dependencies. If you make changes to a schema or update logic, and someone else is relying on that structure, you can break their pipeline or dashboard without knowing it. So we apply principles from semantic versioning. For example, minor updates like adding a new column might be version 1.1, while major breaking changes might go from 1.0 to 2.0. We always publish a changelog and notify subscribers in advance. We give teams time to migrate and sometimes run both versions in parallel for a transition period. In some cases, we keep the old and new versions live side by side for weeks or even months. This way, consumers can test the new version without disruption. Over time, as more teams adopt the new version, we phase out the old one. This approach gives flexibility without sacrificing stability.
That's thorough. How do you handle discoverability? In large orgs, finding the right dataset can be harder than producing it.
Absolutely. Discoverability is a massive challenge. We implemented a centralized data catalog that indexed all of our certified data products. Each entry had metadata like owner name, last refresh time, usage stats, schema documentation, business description, and intended use cases. We integrated this with our internal tools and made sure it was searchable. So if someone typed active customers or churn risk into the internal search bar, they'd get a list of data products that matched, along with context on how to use them. We also included lineage information, so users could see what tables fed into the product and where the data flowed afterward. In addition, we ran internal enablement sessions, demo days where data producers showcased new products and answered live questions. This created a feedback loop and helped bridge the gap between the builders and the consumers.
Let's go deeper into trust. You mentioned it earlier, but what exactly does building trust in data look like operationally?
Building trust in data is about consistency, transparency, and responsiveness. First, consistency. If a stakeholder sees different customer counts in different reports, they lose confidence. So we enforced metric definitions across tools. A metric like monthly active users had a single canonical definition and source of truth, and we used that consistently across all dashboards and reports. Second, transparency. Every data product had its lineage documented, refresh frequency stated, and known limitations flagged. We even showed the last successful pipeline runtime right next to the dashboard. If there was a delay or known issue, users saw that up front. Third, responsiveness. When something broke or a stakeholder flagged an issue, we had a clear escalation path and triaged quickly. We published postmortems and shared what we did to prevent recurrence. All of this combined to create a system where people felt they could rely on the data, and if things went wrong, they'd know about it immediately.
I want to switch gears for a moment. How do you make sure the right people are involved when designing a new data product?
The key is cross-functional collaboration from day one. When we scoped a new data product, say a personalized recommendation feed, we brought together the data scientists who would build the model, the engineers responsible for the real-time infrastructure, the product managers who own the user experience, and the business stakeholders who define success metrics. We held joint design sessions where we whiteboarded the data flow, listed assumptions, and identified potential failure points. This not only surfaced edge cases early, but also created alignment. People felt invested because they were part of the design process, not just receiving the end result. After the initial build, we conducted stakeholder UAT, user acceptance testing, where users interacted with the data product, flagged issues, and provided feedback. This iterative loop helped us avoid surprises and ensured better adoption at launch.
Sounds like strong product thinking. Speaking of that, do you have dedicated data product managers, or is that responsibility shared?
At scale, I strongly advocate for having dedicated data product managers. When you're running multiple high-impact data products, It's no longer feasible for analysts or engineers to juggle technical delivery with stakeholder management. Data PMs own the what and why, while the data team owns the how. They define the use cases, prioritize requests, measure adoption, and communicate updates. They also serve as translators, bridging business needs with technical feasibility. In earlier stage teams, this role might be informal or shared, but as the number of products and consumers grows, having a dedicated data PM helps ensure that the data team remains focused, aligned, and responsive.
What about innovation? With so much process and structure, how do you leave room for experimentation and new ideas?
That's a great question. We're very intentional about carving out space for innovation. We allocate 10 to 15% of team capacity for data spikes, short, exploratory projects that test a hypothesis or prototype a new data set. These are deliberately kept lightweight with minimal process. If something shows promise and gets traction, we consider productizing it. We also run internal hackathons where data engineers, analysts, and scientists team up to build something outside their regular roadmap. Many of our now core data products, like our LTV predictor or dynamic pricing tool, started as side projects during these hack weeks. The goal is to create a culture where experimentation is celebrated, not penalized. We even built a sandbox environment where people could safely play with new data sources without impacting production systems.
Final question for this section. What's the most common mistake you see when teams try to implement a data as a product model?
The biggest mistake is focusing too much on the technical layer and not enough on the user experience. You can have the cleanest pipeline, the most accurate data, and the best infrastructure. But if end users don't understand what the data means, can't find it, or don't trust it, it won't be used. I've seen teams spend months building sophisticated architectures only to realize they never asked stakeholders what they actually needed. The second common pitfall is not defining ownership. Without clear accountability, things break and no one feels responsible. To make the data as a product model work, you need product thinking, clear roles, feedback loops, and a relentless focus on usability. It's not just about the data, it's about who uses it and how it helps them make decisions.
Thanks, Jordan. That was a strong foundation. Let's now talk about scaling this data as a product model across an organization. What does the rollout look like when you're starting from scratch or from a very fragmented state?
That's one of the most common scenarios I've faced, honestly. Organizations rarely start with a clean slate. There's usually a patchwork of dashboards, overlapping tables, competing metrics, and undocumented pipelines. The first step in rolling out a data product model is mapping the current landscape. You need to know what exists, who owns it, and how it's being used or misused. We typically start with a discovery phase that involves stakeholder interviews, system audits, and usage analysis. Once we have a good sense of the current state, we identify a few high-impact candidates for productization. These are usually tables or pipelines that serve multiple teams, get queried frequently, and are currently fragile or undocumented. We then formalize ownership, build documentation, and treat those assets as our pilot data products. By showing early wins and making the improvement visible, whether through stability or better adoption, we build momentum for the broader rollout.
That sounds practical. How do you structure your team to support this kind of product-centric approach? Do you reorganize?
We try not to do a big bang reorganization. Instead, we build around natural domains, marketing, finance, product, operations, etc., and assign pods or squads to each. Each pod has data engineers, analysts, or scientists, and often a data product manager. Their job is to own the data products within their domain end to end. This setup ensures that teams are deeply familiar with their stakeholders and can respond quickly to evolving needs. Over time, as the number of products grows, we layer in horizontal platform teams. These teams build shared tooling, governance frameworks, monitoring infrastructure, and support systems like catalogs or lineage tools. The vertical pods focus on domain-specific delivery, while the platform team ensures consistency, quality, and scalability across all pods. It's similar to how software organizations separate feature teams and infrastructure teams.
That brings me to platform thinking. What foundational capabilities should a data platform offer to support the product mindset?
Great question. A mature data platform should offer a few things out of the box. First, data lineage and impact analysis. If I change a column in a key data product, I should know exactly what dashboards, queries, or models will break. Second, robust testing and validation. This includes schema checks, freshness SLAs, and anomaly detection, all automated and integrated into the pipeline. Third, discoverability and metadata. The platform should have a searchable catalog, auto-generated documentation, and tagging systems so that users can find and understand data easily. Fourth, access management and observability. Teams should be able to track who's using what, how often, and set access controls appropriately. And finally, easy onboarding and templating. If a team wants to publish a new data product, they should be able to use a starter template that includes standard monitoring, naming conventions, documentation structure, and versioning logic. All of this makes productization repeatable and lowers the barrier to entry.
It sounds like a lot of this requires investment. How do you make the case to leadership for dedicating time and budget to these capabilities?
The business case is straightforward when framed in terms of impact and risk. I usually start by showing the cost of poor data practices, how much time is lost to rework, how many decisions are based on inconsistent numbers, how often analytics teams are blocked by missing documentation or stale pipelines. I then tie this to key business metrics. For example, if marketing attribution is broken due to unreliable data, we're likely misallocating millions in spend. Or if a product team's experiments are invalid because of metric drift, that's lost learning. On the positive side, I show how trusted, reusable data products accelerate new use cases. One example is when our operations team reduced fulfillment errors by 20% using a delivery risk model built entirely from stable, well-documented features sourced from our data product catalog. That kind of result makes it clear that investing in platform capabilities pays off not in theory, but in direct business value.
Let's talk about failure now. What's an example of a rollout that didn't go well? What went wrong?
I can think of one right away. At a previous company, we tried to launch a company-wide KPI dashboard built on top of standardized metrics. The idea was solid, create a single source of truth, but we moved too fast and didn't engage stakeholders deeply enough. We defined the metrics ourselves based on what we thought made sense. We also changed names and definitions that people were already familiar with, thinking our versions were better. When we launched, adoption was poor. People kept using their old dashboards and even questioned the accuracy of our numbers. The trust wasn't there. In retrospect, the mistake was not co-creating with our users. We treated the rollout as a one-way push rather than a collaborative process. We learned that successful data products require not just technical excellence, but also emotional buy-in. We eventually fixed it, reopened design conversations, integrated feedback, and rolled out a version 2, but it took months to recover.
That's a great example. So how do you create that emotional buy-in? What are some methods you've found effective?
Involving stakeholders early is the key. Before building anything, we run discovery sessions, essentially interviews or workshops, where we ask teams about their pain points, current workarounds, and decision-making processes. We co-design metric definitions with them, run prototype sessions to validate outputs, and let them test things before launch. We also recognize contributors. When we release a new data product, we often include a small shout-out to the teams who helped shape it. It sounds small, but it goes a long way. Internally, we also run demo days where teams present their new data products and share outcomes, what worked, what didn't, and what they learned. These sessions build community and show that the data team is not operating in a silo. Finally, we make feedback loops explicit. Every data product has a link or contact for suggestions or issue reporting, and we respond promptly. When people see that their feedback leads to action, they're much more likely to stay engaged.
Let's talk about product lifecycle. How do you handle deprecation or retirement of data products?
Product retirement is actually one of the most important but least glamorous parts of the process. We treat it just like software deprecation. First, we monitor usage. If a data product hasn't been accessed in 90 days, it gets flagged. We then reach out to past consumers and check if it's safe to sunset. If everyone agrees, we set a retirement date and communicate it clearly. During the grace period, usually a month. We keep both versions live and add banners to dashboards or tables indicating deprecation. We also archive metadata, schema, and sample queries so that the product can be resurrected if needed in the future. This process keeps our ecosystem lean and avoids clutter. Without it, the warehouse becomes a graveyard of outdated products that confuse users and dilute trust.
Earlier, you touched on cross-functional pods. In your experience, how do you ensure consistency in practices across multiple pods or teams?
This is where the platform team and governance structures play a big role. While pods have autonomy in delivery, the platform team defines standards, naming conventions, logging practices, testing frameworks, and versioning protocols. We also have a data council that meets monthly, composed of leads from each pod and platform. This group reviews new proposals, resolves conflicts, and shares best practices. For example, if two pods are defining similar metrics differently, the council helps align definitions. We also run internal training and certification programs. Every new data team member goes through onboarding modules that cover our core principles: what it means to treat data as a product, how to publish responsibly, how to document, and how to handle schema changes. These rituals keep the org aligned without being overly bureaucratic.
Have you ever dealt with tension between centralization and decentralization in data teams? How do you balance the two?
All the time. It's one of the classic challenges in data org design. Centralization gives you consistency, control, and economies of scale. Decentralization gives you speed, flexibility, and domain expertise. Our approach is to centralize infrastructure and governance, but decentralize execution. The central team builds tools, defines templates, enforces policies, and runs the platform. Domain pods have the autonomy to build data products, serve stakeholders, and innovate within their space. We ensure alignment through shared OKRs, cross-team ceremonies, and regular audits. If a pod wants to deviate from a standard, they can, but they need to make the case and commit to supporting it. This structure gives us the best of both worlds.
You also mentioned data contracts earlier. How do you use contracts in your data as a product workflow?
Data contracts formalize expectations between producers and consumers. Just like APIs have contracts that specify input-output behavior, data contracts specify schema, refresh frequency, and quality thresholds. For instance, if a team owns a source table that feeds into a machine learning model, they sign a contract saying that the data will land by 6 a.m. daily, will not have nulls in certain fields, and will follow a specified format. If they need to change something, they must notify downstream teams in advance. We implement this through tools like DBT tests, grade expectations, and schema registries. When a contract is violated, say the schema breaks or nulls spike, we trigger alerts and halt the pipeline. This protects downstream products and promotes accountability. Over time, we've found that contracts reduce surprises and create a culture of reliability.
Let's look ahead. What does next-level data as a product maturity look like to you? What are signs an org is truly leading in this area?
At full maturity, data products are treated just like software products. They have roadmaps, usage metrics, user personas, and well-defined feedback loops. There's a portfolio view where leadership understands which products are mission-critical, which are experimental, and which are ready for sunset. The organization invests in tooling and automation so that productization is the default, not the exception. There's a strong culture of reuse, where features or data assets built for one use case are actively leveraged in others. And finally, data is embedded in the product development lifecycle itself. For example, when a new feature is designed, the tracking plan, metric impact, and data needs are defined up front. You know you're mature when data isn't a follow-up task. It's a first-class citizen in every decision.
So far, we've talked a lot about systems, platforms, and structure. But let's shift gears a bit. I'd love to hear about how stakeholder engagement changes when you treat data as a product. What's different?
It changes everything. When you treat data as a product, stakeholders are no longer passive recipients of dashboards or models. They become users with expectations. And like any product, understanding the user journey becomes essential. We begin every product cycle with stakeholder interviews, not just to gather requirements, but to understand pain points, workflows, and decision loops. When a data product is launched, we don't just send a link to a table. We onboard people. We offer training sessions, walkthrough videos, and sample use cases. We make sure the product fits into their daily work. And perhaps most importantly, we don't treat the first release as final. We follow up. We check adoption, run usage analysis, and collect qualitative feedback. Just like a product manager monitors DAU and churn, we monitor engagement and satisfaction. It's a dynamic relationship, not a delivery checkpoint.
Can you give an example of when that kind of engagement made a material difference?
Absolutely. At one point, we were building a pricing intelligence tool for the sales team. Initially, our plan was to expose competitive benchmarks and historical pricing trends in a dashboard. We spent weeks engineering a clean data pipeline and building slick visuals. But before we launched, we ran dry runs with 2 regional sales leads, and what we learned changed everything. They didn't want yet another dashboard. They wanted a single recommendation, what price to offer for a given segment, and they wanted it inside their CRM tool, not in a separate BI tool. That feedback completely changed our delivery strategy. We dropped half the visuals, built a pricing suggestion API, and embedded it into their workflow. Adoption went from what would have been tolerable to nearly 100%. That level of tight alignment only happens when you think of stakeholders as product users, not just consumers.
That's a fantastic pivot. Let's talk about internal education now. What kind of training or cultural programs do you implement to get the entire org aligned with data as a product thinking?
We treat internal education as an ongoing investment, not a one-time onboarding module. For new hires, regardless of role, we run a session called How We Think About Data. It covers data ownership, expectations, where to find things, and how to request or contribute to data products. For analysts, PMs, and engineers, we offer optional deep dives on schema design, testing, and lineage. We also run quarterly data showcases where pods demo new products, explain rationale behind changes, and walk through lessons learned. These aren't just for data folks, they're open to all teams. Then there are our office hours, where stakeholders can ask questions, report issues, or brainstorm new product ideas. Over time, this consistent exposure changes how people think. They stop asking for dashboards and start asking for products. They start thinking about life cycle, not just delivery. And that's when you know the culture is changing.
That's really comprehensive. But culture takes time, and incidents are often where trust is lost. How do you handle a serious incident in a core data product?
Incidents are inevitable. What matters is how you handle them. Our philosophy is transparency and speed. The moment an incident is detected, say a pipeline failure or a data drift, we alert the owner, freeze any downstream consumption if needed, and notify stakeholders via our internal incident channel. Within a few hours, we publish an incident ticket with details: what happened, what's affected, expected resolution time, and current mitigation steps. Once resolved, we run a postmortem. We don't focus on blame, we focus on root causes and systemic fixes. Every postmortem ends with 2 things: a set of prevention steps and a clear owner for each. We share these postmortems across pods so everyone can learn. We even tag them to similar data products so users are aware of historical patterns. Over time, this builds confidence, not because we promise perfection, but because we demonstrate accountability.
From your experience, what kinds of root causes come up the most in these postmortems?
Schema changes upstream without notification are probably the biggest. Someone renames a column or changes a data type, and suddenly half a dashboard breaks. Another common one is logic drift. Over time, business definitions evolve, but the transformation logic doesn't keep up. So metrics start to diverge subtly until someone notices a gap. Data freshness issues also crop up, especially with batch jobs. If one job is delayed due to backfill or infra hiccups, dependent products can go stale. Then there's human error, wrong filters, incorrect joins, or even pushing to production without testing. The key is not just catching the issue, but capturing the pattern. We now have a library of past incidents that helps new team members learn proactively.
Let's talk about portfolio management. When you have dozens of data products, how do you prioritize what to build next, what to maintain, and what to retire?
We treat data products like a living portfolio, and we use a simple but powerful framework: value versus effort. Every quarter, we ask pods to evaluate their products across 3 axes: business impact, current stability, and adoption trend. High value, high adoption products get continued investment. If a product has low adoption despite multiple iterations, we consider retiring it or merging it with another. For new requests, we run prioritization exercises where we score each proposed product based on reach, urgency, and alignment to company OKRs. These scores are reviewed by data PMs and the platform lead, and the final roadmap is shared org-wide. We also maintain a long-tail list of low-effort improvements, things like adding a new field, fixing a definition, or updating documentation. When teams have extra capacity, they pick from that list. This ensures we balance big rocks with continuous polish.
Are there any tools or artifacts you use to make this portfolio more visible to the rest of the company?
Yes, we've built an internal product registry. Think of it like a mix of a data catalog and a product tracker. Every certified data product is listed there with its current owner, status, usage trends, documentation links, last modified date, and known issues. There's a section for in development, in beta, and in sunset. This gives stakeholders transparency into what's coming, what's stable, and what's on the way out. We also publish a quarterly data product health report, which summarizes the state of our top 25 products. It includes usage stats, downtime metrics, NPS from stakeholders, and upcoming roadmap items. This report goes to leadership and helps them understand where to invest further. It's a great way to elevate data products to the same strategic level as software or marketing campaigns.
You touched earlier on extending this product mindset into machine learning systems. Can you expand on that? What does it mean to treat ML artifacts as products?
Absolutely. ML systems are perfect candidates for product thinking because they have clear inputs, outputs, failure modes, and users. For example, if we have a churn prediction model, the model itself is one product, but the feature pipeline feeding it is another, and the API that exposes the score is yet another. Each of those layers needs documentation, version control, owners, monitoring, and a support path. We treat features as first-class citizens. We maintain a feature registry with metadata, reuse stats, and validation checks. When models are retrained, we log model cards that capture assumptions, performance metrics, training data provenance, and ethical considerations. We also run A/B tests on new models to evaluate impact before promotion. All of this helps teams trust that the ML products they're using are reliable, explainable, and maintainable.
How do you balance experimentation and stability in ML products? Those often seem to be in conflict.
It's definitely a tension. We've developed what we call the experiment to product pipeline. The idea is to separate environments for exploration versus deployment. In the experimental zone, data scientists can try different features, architectures, and objectives without worrying about production constraints. Once a model shows promise, it enters a formal review process. We validate inputs, run ethical checks, define performance baselines, and assess potential regressions. Only after it passes those gates does it become a candidate for production. Once live, the model is monitored just like any other product. We track prediction drift, latency, and downstream business impact, and we define rollback plans if things go wrong. This layered approach lets us move fast without compromising reliability.
What role do stakeholders play in these ML products? Is it just data scientists and engineers?
Not at all. In fact, stakeholder involvement is even more critical in ML. Take that churn model example. The customer success team has to trust the score and know how to act on it. So we involve them early, before we even finalize the objective function. We ask questions like, if we predict high risk, what actions can your team take? Or, what would false positives cost us? Their input often changes our approach. Sometimes we optimize for precision, other times for recall, depending on operational constraints. After launch, we hold regular calibration reviews where we look at how the model performed on real cases and whether the actions taken made sense. This ensures alignment between algorithm and action, which is where real value comes from.
We've covered a lot. Let me ask you this. What advice would you give to a head of data starting this journey at a mid-sized company? Maybe 200 people. Data maturity just evolving.
I'd say start small but intentional. Don't try to productize everything overnight. Identify 2 or 3 high-leverage data sets, ones that power core business processes, are used by multiple teams, and have known pain points. Formally assign owners, write documentation, and set expectations. Launch those as your first data products and treat them seriously. At the same time, invest in education. Help people across the company understand what it means to treat data as a product, why ownership matters, how to give feedback, and what good looks like. Build lightweight templates and tools that lower the friction of doing the right thing. And finally, celebrate wins. When a product gets adopted, reduces manual work, or improves a decision, tell that story. Culture shifts happen through stories, not policies. Over time, those few initial products will become your foundation, and the mindset will start spreading naturally.
I love that. We'll wrap here for now, but this was a deeply insightful session. You've painted a clear picture of what it means to build not just data pipelines, but data ecosystems with ownership, trust, and usability. Looking forward to continuing this in our final session.
Thanks, Alex. I've enjoyed the conversation. Happy to go deeper anytime.
Welcome back, Jordan. Let's close out this topic with some of the harder, less glamorous challenges. Say you're walking into an organization with a lot of legacy pipelines, deeply embedded habits, and very little appetite for change. How do you start transforming that into a data as a product culture?
That situation is more common than not. Most companies that are 5 to 10 years old have a pile of legacy systems, hand-coded SQL logic, duplicated dashboards, undocumented pipelines. The first thing I do is avoid the temptation to criticize the existing setup. Those systems were built under different constraints, and they served their purpose. So I approach the transformation with respect and pragmatism. I start by identifying the highest leverage pipelines, usually the ones most used or most business critical, and I focus on productizing just one of them end to end. That means assigning ownership, documenting lineage, setting SLAs, and communicating with stakeholders. Once that single product shows tangible benefits, fewer errors, faster onboarding, higher trust, we use it as a case study to build internal credibility. That story becomes our change lever. From there, we tackle the second product, then the third. Gradually, we create a flywheel of improvement without paralyzing the team in process.
I like that you're starting with respect, but how do you bring along the engineers who might feel this adds unnecessary process to something that was working fine?
That's where empathy and incentives come into play. I spend time with the engineers, not just to explain what needs to change, but to ask what's been painful for them. 9 times out of 10, the answer is firefighting, constantly getting pinged about broken dashboards, fielding questions about undocumented logic, or being afraid to make changes for fear of breaking downstream processes. When we show them that data as a product discipline actually reduces their pager duty and makes their work more visible and respected, the resistance usually fades. We also make sure that credit is shared. When a data product launch goes well, we highlight the engineering effort in company-wide updates. And finally, we don't make everything mandatory from day one. We start by offering support, templates, tools, linters, and only later do we codify it into governance. That soft start wins hearts before enforcing rules.
That's a thoughtful approach. Now let's move up the ladder. When you're talking to a C-level audience, say the COO or CEO, how do you explain the value of treating data like a product?
Executives care about outcomes, speed of decision-making, cost reduction, risk mitigation, and business growth. So I avoid jargon and focus on how data products affect those levers. For example, I'll say, right now, your operations team spends 4 days a month reconciling reports across regions because the underlying data isn't standardized. If we build a regional performance product with clear ownership and version control, we can reduce that to half a day and avoid costly errors. Or, your sales team is flying blind on discount decisions because they don't trust the historical pricing dashboard. We can build a pricing intelligence product with daily updates and embedded guidance that boosts deal quality and margin. When framed this way, data as a product isn't a process change, it's a business enabler. And the conversation shifts from compliance to investment.
Have you ever had to justify the headcount for roles like data product manager or platform engineers? What's your argument when budgets are tight?
All the time. I usually frame it in terms of leverage. A good data product manager might cost $150,000 a year, but if they unblock 10 analysts from duplicating effort, reduce stakeholder confusion, and accelerate delivery by 30%, their ROI is immediate. Same with platform engineers. If one engineer builds tooling that saves 10 pods an hour a week, that's 500 hours a year of reclaimed time. I also draw analogies to product and engineering orgs. No one expects a software engineer to handle customer interviews, roadmap planning, design reviews, testing, deployment, and stakeholder communication on their own. We have PMs, designers, QA, DevOps. Yet in many data teams, we expect data engineers and scientists to do all of that solo. That model doesn't scale. Hiring support roles isn't bloat, it's architecture.
Let's talk about scaling influence. Say your immediate team gets it. How do you spread the data product mindset to teams that don't report to you?
Influence beyond hierarchy comes from three things: visibility, value, and vocabulary. First, visibility. We make our work and wins visible through internal demos, Slack channels, newsletters, and lunch and learns. We show how adopting data as a product helped another team go faster or reduce errors. That creates interest. Second, value. When we collaborate with external teams, we don't just build and hand over, we partner. We invite them into the design process, share ownership, and give them tools to monitor or evolve the product. They feel the benefits firsthand. Third, vocabulary. We establish a shared language around things like SLAs, contracts, versions, and backlogs. That makes cross-team collaboration smoother. And finally, we celebrate champions. When a non-data team successfully productizes their own asset or starts using contracts, we highlight that as a model. Influence spreads faster when it's distributed.
I want to double-click on vocabulary. What are some terms or phrases you've standardized across teams to support this culture?
Great question. We try to keep the language simple and aligned with product thinking. For example, instead of calling something a pipeline, we call it a data product if it serves multiple users. Instead of refresh cadence, we say SLA because that has usability built in. We don't say schema change, we say version update with backward compatibility in mind. We use consumer and producer instead of just upstream and downstream. It emphasizes the relationship. We refer to launch, not just deployment. That encourages teams to think about communication, training, and measurement. We talk about sunsetting products, not just deleting tables. And perhaps most importantly, we talk about feedback loops as part of the product lifecycle, not just bug reports. This common vocabulary aligns expectations and elevates the discourse.
That's powerful. Now let's talk metrics. How do you measure the maturity of a data as a product practice across an organization?
We use a maturity framework with 5 dimensions: ownership, quality, adoption, standardization, and impact. Ownership looks at whether each product has a named DRI, documented schema, and support plan. Quality measures include SLA adherence, validation coverage, and post-incident recovery time. Adoption is about usage metrics, stakeholder satisfaction, and duplication rates. Standardization includes use of templates, contract compliance, and naming conventions. Impact is tied to business outcomes, how much time saved, revenue influenced, or decisions improved due to a product. Each of these has multiple levels: ad hoc, developing, established, and mature. We self-assess quarterly, and we use this to guide training and resourcing. It's not a scorecard to punish teams, it's a map to help them grow.
What would you say is the tipping point? That moment when a company transitions from dabbling in this idea to fully embracing it?
I've seen 2 signs consistently. One is when teams start asking for data products instead of dashboards. That means they understand reusability, contracts, and lifecycle. The second is when data teams start saying no to one-off requests because there's already a product available, or they say yes but with a plan to generalize and publish. That shift from reactive to proactive behavior is a cultural milestone. Also, when business leaders start referencing data products in OKRs or strategy docs, you know it's in the bloodstream. At that point, you're not just running a data function, you're powering a data-driven company.
One last question, Jordan. You've clearly thought deeply about this, but what's one thing you've changed your mind about over the years in your data leadership journey?
Early in my career, I believed the solution to data chaos was centralization. One golden table, one metric store, one dashboard. But I've come to realize that too much centralization creates bottlenecks and stifles context. The real goal isn't uniformity, it's interoperability. You want different teams to be able to move fast in their domains, but plug into shared standards where it counts. That means investing in contracts, tooling, and culture, not just central control. So now I optimize for federated autonomy with connective tissue, not a single source of truth at all costs. That shift in thinking has made my teams faster, more engaged, and more resilient.
That's an excellent insight to close on. Jordan, this has been one of the most comprehensive and practical explorations of data as a product I've seen. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Alex. I really appreciated the depth of the questions. This was a great conversation.